Hello, everyone. The General Mills Bell Institute of Health, Nutrition, and Food Safety is pleased to present this webinar, Be a Pre- and Probiotic Pro, Overview of the Gut Microbiome. For those of you that recognize March as National Nutrition Month, we're delighted to celebrate with you today. My name is Ravi Menon. I'm a Senior Principal Scientist at the General Mills Bell Institute of Health, Nutrition, and Food Safety, and I will be host for today's webinar. If you're not familiar with the Bell Institute of Health, Nutrition, and Food Safety, we're a dedicated group within General Mills whose mission is to be a source of health, nutrition, and food safety expertise that creates value and growth. We believe foods must make us better, and we work hard to make safe food people love while improving the nutrition of our products. We're happy to bring you this webinar today in partnership with the General Mills Food Service. Now, before we begin today's program, which is outlined on this slide, I would like to cover a few housekeeping matters. This webinar is being recorded. The recorded webinar, along with the presentation slides, will be made available to you after today's presentation. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a Q&A period. You may submit questions at any time during the webinar by using the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. After the webinar concludes, you will receive an email with links to the PowerPoint slides, continuing education credits, and a survey. As a reminder, you must register and log into the webinar with your individual credentials to receive credits for today's webinar. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. The first speaker, Suzanne Skapiak, is a project manager in a centralized product design team at General Mills. She works with the R&D, marketing, and consumer insights teams to develop new products and messaging strategies focused on consumer needs. Prior to her role in product design, Suzanne worked at the General Mills Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition for 8 years. Her primary role was translating science to consumer-friendly language to help communicate the key health and nutrition messages of General Mills products to a variety of audiences. Suzanne earned her master's degree in nutrition science at the University of Minnesota. She is a registered dietitian and earned her undergraduate degree in nutrition at Pennsylvania State University. Our second speaker, Mary Ellen Sanders, has been compensated by General Mills to do this webinar. Dr. Mary Ellen Sanders is a consultant in the area of probiotic microbiology. She works internationally on technical aspects of probiotic product development. She strives to provide evidence-based information on probiotics to consumers and professionals. She is current chair of the United States Pharmacopoeia Probiotics Expert Panel, collaborates in clinical studies to validate probiotic safety and efficacy, and co-chaired the World Gastroenterology Organization Guidelines Committee, preparing practice guidelines for the use of probiotics and prebiotics for gastroenterologists. Dr. Sanders serves as Executive Science Officer for the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics, or ISAP, where she works to advance the science of probiotics and prebiotics. We're especially excited to be offering this topic today because of the interest in the microbiome expressed by participants in our last webinar and post-webinar survey. Imagine 200 square meters, that is the size of a tennis court, and the total surface area of your gut that harbors trillions of bacteria that play a critical role in human health, as you will hear from our speakers shortly. Again, as a reminder, please submit questions you may have to our presenters at any time during the webinar using chat feature located on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. With that, I'll now welcome our first speaker, Suzanne Skapiak. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you for having me be part of this conversation today. And thank you to the people who are joining to participate in today's webinar. We're really excited to be here to share with you some of the research that we did from a consumer perspective related to how consumers today are understanding and viewing the relationship between their health and their gut. So I'll be taking you through, in the beginning part of this webinar, research that General Mills funded to get a perspective and an understanding of just where are consumers thinking about this topic, because that's really critical for us as a company making products for people to understand just where are they coming from, what is their perspective, and what is their understanding. And then I know that Mary Ellen will be getting into the science, which will also be very pertinent for the work that you all are doing. So first of all, why study this? From a General Mills perspective, as we look to understand just consumers' view and perception of their health and the interplay between what they're eating and how they're feeling, it becomes clear that consumers today are not really perceiving themselves to be in optimal health. And it's surprising as you look at the statistics here from the Centers for Disease Control that there are quite a significant percentage of the population that is really feeling like there's some room to improve in terms of reaching what my optimal health could be like. And we're seeing that nearly 20%, so that's 1 in 5 Americans are categorizing themselves as in either fair or poor health. And I think we see this as a global trend too in terms of perception of health, where nearly 30% of European men and 35% of European women saying they're not in optimal health, either stating fair or poor health. So that's a significant percentage of the population that is really saying, there's something different, something better that could be done to maximize my health. And so as we looked at exploring this particular area and understanding just what are the trends and how are people really changing and viewing what their role is in maintaining and managing their own health, you start to see this sort of idea that, hey, we're not feeling healthy and we're tired of it. So we're undertaking, in some cases, pretty radical or drastic measures to try to optimize our feeling of well-being. And so you see things cropping up like this idea of CrossFit gaining more and more popularity in terms of this sort of very sort of drastic view in terms of what we need to be doing to pushing our body to get to optimal health and reaching a better lifestyle, or urban agriculture. This idea that people are starting to reject this sense of, hey, I'm really not interested in this idea of a short-term diet fix, a short-term solution, when what I'm really seeking actually is a long-term overhaul or a lifestyle change to really try to optimize my health. So we're starting to see this bubbling up. And the exciting part about the role of gut in health, what we started to see when we were digging into this area of research is that yes, we see, and you probably have yourselves as well, observed this increase in focus from a science perspective, more and more research being conducted and funded and reported on the role of the gut microbiome and how that can interplay with health. You can see that spike there, and this is just a number of publications in PubMed, just how interesting this area is from a science and a research perspective. The exciting overlay, though, is that at the same time, and it doesn't always happen this way, that you have this overlay of interest in science as well as this overlay in interest and popularizing this topic from an influencer perspective. And so as we're talking about influencers in this space, some people that you may be familiar with or have seen popping up, such as Michael Pollan, who's saying, some of my best friends are germs. And so you start to see from an influencer perspective of what cultural forces can be shaping people's perspectives about the role of gut health and overall health is gaining some traction here through these food influencers. And so you see this opportunity of being able to marry cultural shifts with actual influx of science. So we feel like that's an exciting space to be in, because it means that overall you're going to have more interest from consumers, more interest from patients in understanding this overlay of gut health and their overall health, because you're getting forces pushing from both sides, both from the science as well as the influencer space. So that's interesting, and our research goal from our perspective when we set out to understand consumers' perspectives was really trying to understand comprehensively how are consumers viewing the effect of their gut and their gut health on their overall health. And our goal was to really understand the snapshot from today, but then trying to understand too, like, how may this evolve in the future in terms of impacting what types of foods and what food offerings people will be seeking as their perspective on this continues to evolve. So that was our research goal. So some of the key findings I'll go into. This idea, one thing that we came to realize as you're talking to people about the role of the gut microbiome and why is that resonating, why is it that taking hold from an influencer perspective, why are consumers interested or resonating with this idea of the gut microbiome, because it's kind of a complicated thing to talk about and explain, and it is difficult to talk about the benefit of germs, as people have such negative connotations with bacteria. And so why is this taking hold, or why is it making sense? And one of the things that we think is as you talk to people and understand that this whole idea of the gut microbiome and its interconnectedness with health overall is something that people can really relate to, because we're living in this system, this world system that is made up of interconnected systems now at this point. So sort of this spider web effect of, everything you turn around and read about now is about globalization. You have the interconnectedness of the web, of people being able to feel like, things are not discrete events happening in time in one area in isolation anymore. There's this ramification effect, right, that can be felt as things are connected across a network, a web-like system. So that mentality is very intuitive to people now. It's very intuitive to consumers now because of the environment in which we live and operate and function and work. And so that mentality is pervasive as we think about our health as well. And so really being able to intuitively connect this idea of interconnectedness through the gut microbiome to overall health just makes sense at this point in time for consumers. The other key thing that we learned is why the gut microbiome may be exciting or interesting or resonating or impacting consumers' behavior at this time is that it really resonates with this idea about, hey, we're not feeling good, we're not feeling in optimal health, and we're tired of it. We want to do something about it. We want to take some control back over our own health and wellness. And we could have a whole other topic of discussion related to the healthcare system in the U.S. and pros and cons of things that are and aren't working. But I would say that overall this sense of I am not feeling in control of my health as I deal with some very nebulous health-related issues. And so here is something that seems to make sense of, if I can get control over my gut health, if I can understand this connection between the gut microbiome and how I'm feeling overall, my overall well-being of health, that gives me some sense of I am in control of my own wellness and my own health and well-being, and that's appealing to consumers. Why the gut microbiome resonates with consumers is just this idea that as we are in a system where we are trying to manage some nebulous, scary topics that we don't have all the answers for yet, right? Like as we think about Alzheimer's, or we think about ADD or ADHD in kids, or weight management, for goodness sakes, is something that we've been struggling with to unlock solutions that are long-term for people. And so these areas where, hey, there is no clear answer, there is no key, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for these things. And so that is a natural fit with this idea of this black box area of gut health, and sort of the ambiguous reach of how my gut impacts my overall health really matches with the ambiguous nature of the illnesses that a lot of our consumers and your patients are dealing with today. And so it seems, again, like a natural fit. Like if I can unlock the solutions through this sort of magic of this gut microbiome in terms of being able to bring some resolution to these issues that I'm dealing with on a long-term basis that don't seem to have a clear cut, they are not clear-cut in nature as well, then it seems to make sense that these two things may go together. The other thing is that we see that the gut microbiome resonates with consumers because we're really moving away, at least as we see, starting to see some consumers really moving away from this westernized approach of treating symptoms into having more interest in this idea of, hey, I'm tired of taking this migraine medication. I want to understand, how do I get at the root cause of why I'm getting these migraines in the first place? Or, you know, many of these things where it's, I'm tired of it being on this wheel of treating symptoms, and I would really like to eradicate what is the main issue going on here, and how can I address that? And that promise that the gut microbiome holds, both from a science perspective as we continue to research in this area, and as this idea of, hey, this may finally unlock, this may finally be the root cause of the ailments that I'm dealing with, is promising to consumers. They feel hopeful. They feel hopeful from that idea. So what we saw here is a move, a shift, if you will, in some lead edge consumers of this idea that, hey, I'm really starting to move away. And this is research that was conducted here in the U.S. and a little bit of additional work done in European markets, in UK and France. So really, definitely squarely in like Western cultures. But it's this idea of moving from an established consumer view of health, which is I have these separate issues that I may be managing separately, even as we think about the healthcare system in terms of specialists and people going to different people to manage separate entities of their health care. It really is this disconnected model of, hey, weight management is separate issue from food sensitivity, separate issue from inflammation, immunity, treating and managing and researching these areas in a disconnected model. We're starting to see this shift towards an evolving view of health that really does put the gut microbiome squarely in the center and providing those links, connecting that web, that interconnected web of, hey, if I influence something in this space, it's going to have an impact over here. If I have something going on with food sensitivity, somehow this is going to be interconnected with the weight issues that I've been struggling with. And so what we see from this journey, and I would say that it definitely is a journey over time. We certainly talk to lead edge consumers. We're definitely not at a mass market appeal by any means as we think about some of these mindsets and some of these solutions, but we definitely see heading in that direction. So we have today's early adopters who are, yeah, there is such a thing as good bacteria. Yes, I understand that and I'm embracing that. I'm trying to nourish a healthy gut flora, and I'm interested in this area, or I'm taking supplements of probiotics, or I'm trying to find foods. Maybe Mary Ellen is going to talk about what is and isn't considered probiotics, but you see these moves about like, hey, I'm trying to incorporate these fermented foods or these things in because I'm aware of this connection and I'm trying to foster that connection. And so that's where we see consumers that our early adopters are today. And then as we move more towards what's this going to evolve to in the future in terms of a mass market, you see this shift more towards the microbiome understanding. And I'd say today in terms of the difference between pro and prebiotics, yes, people are grasping onto this idea of there are somehow beneficial types of bacteria. This idea of prebiotics and nurturing the gut microflora through different substrates is still quite, I think, in a future market. But I would just point out that this slide that we have here in the middle, where there's some more advanced markets in the world than maybe where we are here in the U.S., or even as you look at different industries being more advanced than in the food industry, you see that this pet food company called Holistic Selects very much talks about this idea. Their positioning for their pet food is head to tail health starts in the middle, and that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. We're not just talking about digestive health. We're talking about how do I impact my overall health by influencing my gut and how that is connected to the rest of my health, and that pet food company really has it. And so this idea of health through the GI as being a journey. Some people have different ways in which they're viewing themselves and their bodies and how their bodies work, and that definitely translates into what different types of approaches they're interested in pursuing in terms of maintaining their health and wellness. So we lay out two separate constructs here that we saw, which was one, that some people are envisioning their bodies as simple machines, and it's a very sort of one-to-one approach of, hey, there's certain nutrients, there's specific nutrients, there's set amounts of things, there's universal rules that may apply. There's a very one-to-one effect of if I eat this food, it will impact my body in this specific way. I think mainly we're really familiar with that. We're really comfortable in talking in that space as we counsel with patients and with consumers. It's a very, hey, if you eat this fiber, you will have better bowel movement type of idea. It's a very one, eat this and have a specific body on my effect. There's also this idea that people are starting to view their bodies more also as a unique, complex ecosystem, so that you're looking at more of the holistic approach of, hey, you know what, I better be comprehensive in the things that I'm eating because I'm not quite sure how everything is interrelated, and it is a very complex, our bodies are a very complex ecosystem. And so trying to get to this approach of there is one probiotic or there is one specific food ingredient that I should be focusing on including doesn't really match with this idea of, hey, you know what, this is a complex ecosystem. We're never going to know. There's this very interconnected, everything interacts with everything. So diversity is the way to go. I'm going to spread it out. I'm going to make sure I'm having diversity of foods. I'm going to have this very inclusive mindset because it's a much more holistic approach. And so we see this shift. And I would just point out that you see this shift, but it can be within the same person. So here's an example of one consumer who is thinking in these terms of one-to-one sort of simple body, like, hey, oatmeal can provide protein, it provides carbs, and so this is that simple mindset approach. But then he's also like, but you know what, like everything is so connected, you're never going to be able to try to connect every neuron in the brain. That just somehow seems impossible and so complex. So at one point we're never going to know everything. So just for safe measure, you know, I'm gonna approach things in a more holistic way. I will just go through quickly this construct of solutions to take control of my health because I think it's interesting to think about as somebody working with patients or in a position to counsel with patients is just thinking through this and trying to understand as you're talking to somebody, hey, how are they viewing themselves and their own health? This idea of my body is a simple machine. So I'm, as a patient, if that's my view, my primary view, I'm going to respond to things that are numbers, that are health claims, that are percentages and nutrient content claims, because that's how I'm thinking that my body works. If I'm somebody that is much more from a holistic diet approach, I'm not going to respond to those same approaches. I'm not going to respond to those same solutions. It's going to be more about inherent benefits. It's going to be more about intact, real food, maintaining integrity of foods as they were meant to be, this sort of approach, because it really is this idea that it's a complex system, and so I need to nurture that balance. And so I'm not going to be doing things in excess, and I'm also not going to be excluding or cutting things out that could be beneficial. So just to wrap up my portion before I turn it over to Mary Ellen, just quickly in summary, how to help your patients and residents as you're thinking about this. Try to get at that approach. Try to understand how are people viewing themselves in terms of how their body works. It may help you in terms of having better success at finding solutions that will work for them. And then just what is their level of awareness of the gut microbiome? There's so much stuff that's bubbling out there. Again, as we talk about, the science is bubbling, the influencers are latching onto things and promoting things. I was just reading a report out from VitaFoods Europe that shows that the nutraceutical industry, 23% of these top 200 companies are saying, look, digestive health is a top area for us. We're just going to continue to see the market evolve, more solutions coming out. So really trying to stay on top of how are people viewing this relationship between their gut health, their overall health, and being educated and wise in terms of sorting out what are the things that actually have an impact to the best of our ability to understand from that research perspective. And so I think that will be a good segue for me to turn it over to Mary Ellen to take you through the science perspective.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you on the phone who joined this webinar this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of the science behind probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics, at least in part, and prebiotics act at the level of the microbiome. So before diving into the probiotic and prebiotic science, let's review some of the ways that microbes associated with the human body are important to health. What you see here is a list of the different effects that our colonizing microbes have on our human physiology. And this does represent an interconnected function of the gut microbiota. They are involved in food digestion, in immune system development, endocrine function, energy homeostasis, fat storage, blood lipids, brain signaling, and gut integrity and function. Because of the importance of the microbiota in health, there is great interest in identifying dietary strategies that can support the gut microbiota and help it function more optimally. So what types of dietary strategies are there that can support the gut microbiota? First of all, increasing consumption of fibers is one approach. And we know that fibers can increase overall microbial numbers and diversity. Increasing fermented foods, for example, yogurt, cheese, kefir, pickles, kimchi, kombucha, are all fermented foods that could also support your gut microbiota. And then, of course, there are prebiotics and probiotics. So if we look more deeply into what is a prebiotic, prebiotic was defined recently by the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics, or ISAP, as substrates that are selectively utilized by host microorganisms and that are known to confer a health benefit. Different types of prebiotics include FOS, or fructooligosaccharides, GOS, which are galacto-oligosaccharides, and inulin. But other substances are emerging, and research is really building in this area, so this list will grow. There are food sources of prebiotics. Some are found in onions, garlic, bananas, chicory root, Jerusalem artichokes, and others. But it's important to realize that typically the prebiotic component of these foods are at low levels. And because of that, it can be difficult to get what you might consider to be an effective dose of prebiotics through the course of every day and just eating these foods. And that's why some of the foods that are formulated with additional prebiotics can help you meet that minimum level. Many of the studies conducted with prebiotics utilize about 5 grams per day or even more of prebiotics, and that's a level that's tough to get in foods. What are probiotics? Probiotics were also defined by ISAP as live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. This definition is very similar to a definition that was provided in a 2001 publication by an expert consultation from the FAO-WHO. So let's now look at understanding the key differences between probiotics and prebiotics. As I mentioned, probiotics are microorganisms. They're administered alive. They've been tested and shown to have beneficial health effects. And with regard to probiotics, they may act via the microbiota, but other mechanisms may be involved as well. So for example, as a probiotic is traversing your body, it may interact with your host immune cells and thereby provide some immune benefits. So there are some mechanisms that utilize interaction with the microbiota, but there are others. With prebiotics, they are typically non-digestible carbohydrates. They are not microorganisms, and they are not alive. They are similar to probiotics, though, in that they are required to have a beneficial health effect. And in addition, the mechanism of action of prebiotic function is via the microbiota. So there are some distinctions between probiotics and prebiotics that are important to remember. And just for further information, I will guide you to these infographics that are produced by ISAP and are readily available and downloadable on their website, isapscience.org. The microbes that are commonly used as probiotics are shown here. Different species of Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium, Saccharomyces, and Bacillus are all used currently as probiotics. And as this whole field develops, what is happening is that the research on our normal colonizing bacteria is developing so that scientists are able to tease out the possibility that certain microbes seem to be more associated with health than others. And as this research continues, I fully expect that those microbes that are identified from our normal colonizing microbiota will be identified as probiotics of the future. So this range of microbes is likely to expand. It's very common to talk about probiotics and fermented foods in the same breath, and it's often what we'll see is that fermented foods are called probiotic foods. But in fact, there are some important distinctions between them, which I'd like to highlight here. So again, as I mentioned, probiotics must contain live microbes, and they must be tested and shown to have health benefits. In the case of fermented foods, they are made by the action of live microbes. So live microbes certainly are involved. But in some cases, live microbes may not survive the post-processing that occurs after fermentation. And an example of this is with sourdough bread, which is a fermented food made with lactobacillus and yeast, but that bread, of course, is baked and those microbes are killed. And so the sourdough bread is no longer a source of live microbes and therefore cannot be considered a probiotic food. Another distinction between probiotics and fermented foods is that fermented foods may not have been tested for their health benefits. In the case of probiotics, there are dozens and dozens of randomized controlled trials that show that probiotics can confer a health benefit, but many fermented foods have not been tested in this manner. So whereas probiotics have documented health benefits, fermented foods, we can view them as being likely healthy dietary components, but they may not have enough research behind them to really to meet the bar that's needed to be considered a probiotic. So fermented foods may be a source of live microbes, and they may be a good source of cultures in live microbes in your diet, but they might not be able to be, strictly speaking, considered to be a probiotic. Now, in some cases, fermented foods are probiotic foods, and a good example of this is yogurt. So with yogurt, we have two different types of yogurts in a general sense that are available. One is a probiotic yogurt that contains both the live starter cultures, the Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus, that's used to turn milk into yogurt, but it also has other probiotic bacteria that may be added to that for specific effects. So in the case of probiotic yogurt, they do provide benefits that have been shown in randomized trials that go beyond the benefits associated with just yogurt. But it's also important to remember that regular yogurt also has benefits that come from just the starter cultures that are present. And one of those studied and documented benefits is that those particular live bacteria can help reduce symptoms of lactose intolerance and help improve the ability of people who don't digest lactose well to be able to digest yogurt. An important concept in the field of probiotics is to recognize that not all probiotics are the same. I'm a horse owner, so I like to use horses as an example of this. When you look at the three photos here, you'll see three very different examples of members of the same genus and species. All three of these animals are Equus cabilis. But it's very clear that they have, even though they're the same species, they have different functions. And the same thing is true with probiotics. So the example I have here is 2 different strains of Lactobacillus acidophilus. In one case it's NCFM, and the other is LA1. And you will note that it's important when you're identifying a probiotic to identify the genus, the species, as well as the strain designation. And the reason for that is that different strains may have different traits. And they also will likely have different bodies of evidence that document health benefits. And so it's important to remember that the strains are what really identify the probiotic and can match that probiotic to the body of scientific literature. Choosing a probiotic can be very difficult. There's many options available in the marketplace, and it's not easy to be able to understand what factors to consider when choosing them. In a very simplified approach to this, the decision, in my opinion, needs to be based on, first of all, evidence that a specific probiotic has the desired benefit you're looking for. And secondly, what you need to consider is the individual's health and specific health concerns. And those issues together are what drive the choice of a probiotic. There are some misconceptions in the probiotic field. One of those has to do with the importance of having a probiotic relative to the number of strains that are contained within that probiotic. However, a product with many strains is not necessarily better than a product with just 1 or 2 strains. You have to let the evidence of documented benefits be your guide in this case. You should choose a strain or a strain blend tested in human studies and shown to be effective. In a similar manner, some people have the impression that buying the highest dose possible product is the best way to go. Some products have as few as 1 billion or even 100 million probiotics in them at time of consumption. Others have 50 billion or more. So there's a huge range of doses that are delivered, or numbers of live microbes that are delivered in different probiotic products. But the bottom line is that you should choose a dose that matches the level that's been tested in human studies. And it's not correct to assume that a high-dose product is necessarily better, especially for a particular health consideration that you might have, than a product that has a lower dose. I'm often asked whether or not foods or supplements are better sources of probiotics. And again, if you look at the marketplace, you will see that there are quite a few sources of both foods as well as supplements that contain probiotics that are available. And the different products that are shown in this slide are examples of the many different types of products, some of them being supplements and some of them being foods. The most important factor, once again, is try to find a product that's been tested and shown to have benefit, and shown to have the benefit that you're specifically looking for. In the case where you might have a probiotic strain that's present in multiple formats, then the decision can be based more on convenience. So if you're traveling, for example, and you want to help support your gut while it might be exposed to different types of potential pathogens as you're traveling, you might want to take a dried product or a dietary supplement with you, which is easy to carry and doesn't require refrigeration oftentimes. On the other hand, if you want the nutrition that is associated with a food product in addition to your probiotic, then a food source might be the better option for you. The evidence for benefits of probiotics in humans really does cover a wide range of endpoints. And this figure summarizes many of the ones that have been tested, again, in randomized controlled trials. Note that the subjects that are used in studies for these different endpoints include infants, children, and adults, including elderly adults. And also notice that although the gut is really the most dominant area where benefits have been identified for probiotics, the benefits have been shown to go to other organ systems as well. And this really speaks nicely into that interconnectedness of health that was spoken about in the previous lecture. The types of benefits include treatment of colic, prevention of atopic dermatitis, prevention of necrotizing enterocolitis, which is a very serious condition that occurs for premature infants, managing symptoms of functional bowel disorders, including irritable bowel syndrome, managing symptoms of lactose intolerance, reducing incidence and duration of infectious diseases, including upper respiratory tract infections or the common cold or flu-like symptoms, as well as GI infections, prevention of antibiotic-associated diarrhea, treatment of ulcerative colitis and pouchitis, improved efficacy of antibiotic treatment of bacterial vaginosis, reducing LDL cholesterol, prevention of traveler's diarrhea, and prevention of Clostridium difficile colitis. Now again, it can be very difficult to match products that are on the market with these different endpoints, especially since many of these endpoints cannot be specifically stated on product labels for foods and supplements in the United States. And one source of information that I've found to be helpful is a document called the Clinical Guide to Probiotic Products. And it is available online, and it is available for U.S. products as well as for products in Canada. One nice thing about this guide is that they do update it every year, and I did notice just recently that the 2018 edition is available online. I'm often asked if probiotics have any benefit for healthy people, or is it really just people who are somehow ill or have a diagnosed condition? And what I've done in this slide is just circle some of the areas that I think can be quite relevant to the general population or an at-risk population, and therefore support the use of probiotics as part of a regular dietary regimen. And I'll just point out a couple of these. The first one is management of symptoms of functional bowel disorders. As you heard previously, there are many people walking around who do not have diagnosed illness, but also view themselves as not being in optimal health. And many times those gut symptoms or overall feeling of a non-optimally functioning gut is a presenting issue for them. And probiotics can help these people with some of these, coping with some of these conditions. Another example is the ability of probiotics to reduce LDL cholesterol. Again, many healthy people are walking around that have slightly elevated cholesterol or even more than that, and probiotics may be helpful to them. So there are cases where probiotics may provide a safe approach to the dietary management of many modern health challenges. It's important to remember that not everyone will react to a probiotic in the same way. So in the case of probiotics, you're administering a live microorganism, and that live microorganism is going into the gut, and that gut is greatly affected by our diet and by the colonizing microbes that are just residing there. And another factor, of course, is the individual characteristics of each person, that person's genetics, that person's immune system and how that immune system is functioning, and other aspects that are unique to each of us as individuals. So remember that not everyone will necessarily react to a probiotic in the same way, and a probiotic that may work really well for one client or resident may not work for another. And in that case, you may need to try another probiotic, or maybe probiotics just aren't the solution to that, for that person. A concept is emerging around the idea of the value of including dietary strategies to support a healthy microbiome as part of national dietary guidelines. In the United States, past dietary guidelines advisory committees have mentioned probiotics and prebiotics and the evolving microbiome science, but they really have not embraced the idea that good human nutrition also includes feeding your gut microbiota. The 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee has been formed, and they are currently until March 30th accepting comments about the scope of their investigation into any changes to be made in the dietary guidelines. ISAP, the organization mentioned previously, did submit comments to this committee asking them to consider evidence that microbiota-directed foods may be overall good for the health of Americans and should be included in dietary guidelines. But and of course, you're welcome to submit comments as well. But it'll remain to be seen whether or not the committee embraces this concept. So let me identify just a few resources that are good for you to consult, or I would recommend you to consult for additional information. The World Gastroenterology Organization, which is an association of GI physicians around the world, produced a global guidelines document last year in 2017 on probiotics and prebiotics and clinical uses of them. I will call your attention to tables 8 and 9 in that document. The document provides a nice review of the field, but in tables 8 and 9 it also provides very specific recommendations for particular strains and what GI conditions it might be useful for, and that's freely available online. And this will be linked in the slides that are provided to you at the end of this webinar. Also, as I mentioned, the Clinical Guide to Probiotics, and now there is a 2018 edition. I should also mention that this is an effort that is industry funded, but it is independently conducted, and academics are the ones that have reviewed the research and have graded the level of evidence that is available and is part of this guide. So I do recommend you using that to help sort through the marketplace for probiotics. And finally, the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics has some very useful materials that are useful for professionals as well as for consumers, and helps translate the science of probiotics and prebiotics through their infographics, and I showed a couple of examples of those, but we have many more than that, as well as some short consumer-focused videos that cover issues such as how to choose a probiotic and what are the benefits of probiotics. So let me summarize my key points. First of all, our colonizing microbiota are important to our health. Dietary strategies to help support our gut microbiota include fiber, prebiotics, probiotics, and fermented foods. Remember that fermented foods may contain live microbes and as such may be a source of potentially beneficial live microbes, but they might not have been studied to document their health benefits. So not all fermented foods are probiotic foods. Health benefits for probiotics include therapeutic benefits, but it also include benefits for generally healthy people or at-risk people. When choosing a probiotic, the bottom line is let evidence of health benefit be your guide, and some evidence-based guidelines are available to help you with that. And finally, remember that individuals may respond differently to probiotics. Thank you so much, and I'll give this back to you, Ravi.
Thank you very much, Suzanne and Mary Ellen. Now, as a company that makes yogurt, we hope that you share our excitement on the benefits of consuming fermented foods. The gut microbiome, as you've just heard, is an area of great interest both among consumers as well as in the scientific community. With scientific research on the topic increasing exponentially in the last decade, as you've just heard, there are compelling new ways to think about health and nutrition. Probiotics, fermented foods, and prebiotics may provide a safe approach to dietary management of many modern health challenges. As a healthcare or senior living food service operator, understanding the science and consumer perceptions on this topic could help you better serve your patients and residents. Now again, please don't forget to check out the General Mills food service website, generalmillscf.com, for recipes with yogurts and many more tools and resources. With that, I think we can now move into the Q&A session. The first question is for Suzanne. Suzanne, in your research, where were people primarily getting their information from about gut health?
Thanks, Ravi. So that's always a very interesting question. And when I got moved over from my work in the Bell Institute of Health and Nutrition in the nutrition science side at General Mills and more into the consumer-facing space, I was always asking, this was always my top question when I was talking to consumers is, where are you getting information? Where are you learning this? And really trying to understand who are the consumers' trusted advisors, where are they getting information that's actually impacting their behavior change. And pretty quickly I stopped asking the question because you really come to find out just how strong a force of Google it really is. People are just Googling stuff. They're searching stuff on the internet without much of a frame of reference in terms of trusted information. And the impact of social media as well as just personal relationships. So people are taking advice from those people that are close to them and that are trusted to them. So that could be a family member, that could be a neighbor down the street. And so this is really the information that people are actually taking action on. And it's as much as the connectedness of their community within which they're shopping and making food decisions. So lots of times you hear that people are getting advice from the person bagging their groceries at Whole Foods, or the people that are living and that they can relate to in a personal way, that are living their lives the way that they would like to be living their lives. And so I do feel like there is a much bigger role that we could be playing in terms of making science-based information more accessible and helping people understand the science behind the decisions that they're making. But really I would say top sources are social media, close family and friends, and with just right within the very immediate network of which people are living their lives and making decisions based on how they see other people like them living their lives as well.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Just as a reminder, for those of you who would still like to submit a question, please do so using the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. And now moving on to the second question. This is a question for Mary Ellen Sanders. Can you comment on refrigerated probiotics versus shelf-stable probiotic products?
Sure. Probiotics need to be stored in the manner that the manufacturer recommends, because some require refrigeration and some do not. So it's very simple that we can't say that one is better than the other. It's just as long as the probiotic is being manufactured by a responsible company that is guaranteeing the declared number of microbes through the end of shelf life, just follow the recommendations that the manufacturer makes.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. The next question, again, is for Mary Ellen. Does the type of food the probiotic is delivered in provide a different effectiveness, like yogurt or granola or bars or juice?
Mm-hmm. Some of the research that's been conducted on probiotics is conducted in particular formats. So you'll see some yogurts, for example, that the studies are done in yogurt. And so the absolute best way to translate that research into products is to utilize a product that's similar to what was tested in the research. Other products are tested more in a variety of different types of strains. Different types of food formats. And in that case, oftentimes we don't know if one is necessarily better than another. But again, a responsible company needs to make sure that whatever food format is delivering the probiotic, that it's maintained alive, so the survival is assured through the end of shelf life for the product.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. And again, another question for Mary Ellen. Again, an interesting question here. How do we know that the mother consortia of bacteria, or the SCOBY, in kombucha are safe?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I think that the context of what we've been talking about today is the fact that many, if not most, microbes that exist around us aren't usually harmful for us. But the ones that are harmful can be very harmful. And so it's important to be aware of where you get your cultures. So if you're starting to make kombucha at home, you're getting that culture from someone. And I think you have to just do your due diligence and make sure that wherever you're getting that is a safe source, and that they know what it is that it's being provided. And I would just refer you to several sites that you can find through university extension departments where they will provide safe tips for making fermented foods at home. So I don't discourage you from making them at home, but I think that this question is very important because you should be aware of certain safety issues. So I strongly recommend you try to find some of these guides from high-quality websites.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. The next question, again, is one for Mary Ellen. Are there tests to see what a person's gut microbiome is lacking? I suspect the question is whether any particular consortia of bacteria or type of bacteria is lacking in a healthy gut.
Right. I think the answer to that question is yes, there are tests, but what we have to realize is that I'm not sure that really there's much that can be gleaned from those tests. So you can find someone that will do a stool test for you. Whether or not they're able to tell you anything meaningful from the result of that is what I question. And the reason for that is that we really don't know what a healthy gut microbiota is. And we also have to recognize that a stool sample is a reflection only of what's going on in the very distal portion of the gut. So it's a little bit simplistic to think that we're going to be able to use this in an incredibly helpful diagnostic way. So I think that the science isn't there yet. We don't know what particular microbes we need. We don't really know what particular functions we need. And that's something that I think will develop, and maybe down the road there will be diagnostic tests that can help us identify particular keystone organisms that are missing. But right now I just don't think the science is there to use that in a robust way. Thank
you, Mary Ellen. There's another important question here. I think it's a question on everybody's mind, is that what can one consume probiotics while they're actually consuming antibiotics? And in light of a recent paper that also suggests that there are several other drugs, anti-diabetic drugs and antipsychotics, which a lot of elderly people are on, could also have an impact on gut microbiome. So what are your thoughts on that?
We don't have great studies that look at the timing of administration of probiotics along with antibiotics or other drugs. And so we just have to take our best guess. And I have heard physicians say both, make recommendations differently in this case. I've heard one physician say go ahead and take the probiotic along with the antibiotic because it's better to go ahead and take it than to have to take it at a different time and then forget to take it. And I've heard others say, well, if you can stagger it by a couple of hours, take the antibiotic and then wait a couple of hours and then take the probiotic, and that might be good. Unfortunately, we don't know, so we're just trying to take our best guess. But it is true that other drugs will have an impact both potentially on probiotics but also on the microbiome.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. Another question sort of related to the gut environment and the survival of probiotics. How does the pH of the gut promote or discourage optimal environments for microbiota to live? And how much control do we have on the pH of our gut?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So there's a lot we don't know about gut physiology and the optimal way that our gut should function. But one thing that seems to be a constant over decades of gut health has been the concept that a saccharolytic or a fermentation where the microbes that are in your gut are digesting carbohydrates as opposed to digesting proteins is healthier. The carbohydrates as a substrate in your colon lead to short-chain fatty acids, which can fuel your colonic epithelial cells and which can cross-feed other potentially beneficial members of your gut microbial community. In contrast, if you have a proteinaceous fermentation that's going on in the colon, there's the production of a variety of noxious and potentially dangerous and even potentially carcinogenic types of endpoints or end products, I should say, of microbial metabolism. So we know that diet is important to gut health. We know that certain diets promote certain types of microbes in the gut. To the extent that you have these fermentations that resort in the short-chain fatty acids, which then result in a lower pH of the gut, that is typically presumed to be a healthier state. And of course, what microbes can grow in that type of environment has everything to do with what that environment is, and that there are some microbes that can grow better at lower pH, and certainly Lactobacillus, Bifidobacteria, and others that we have associated with beneficial health are more capable of growing at lower pH than some of the opportunistic or even actual pathogens, and they are inhibited at those lower pHs.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much, Mary Ellen and Suzanne. Thank you all also very much for the great questions and engagement today. But we must conclude today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, you will receive an email shortly which includes 3 items: the slides presented today, the links to the continuing education certificates, and a short survey. We invite you to log back into bellinstitute.com to explore the website, which offers healthcare-specific nutrition resources. Today's presentation will be available on generalmillscf.com, where you can also find product information and great recipes. Please be sure to check it out. With that, we conclude today's program. We must disconnect now. Thank you.